Today, I have two lovely, lovely guests here, and we are going to be discussing Malazan Book of the Fallen as first-time readers from the female perspective. I'll get into that a little bit more, but before I do, I'll just go ahead and have my lovely guests introduce themselves. They probably don't need any introduction on my channel, but we'll go ahead and start with Ola.
I am Ola, the reading witch, as you might know me from my channel name. And I talk a lot about books, of course, but also witchy stuff. So a lot of times I do tarot readings for books and stuff like that. And I just started blogging, and they are very short and kind of like what I like to capture with photography and stuff like that. But that's basically my channel.
I am Brittany with the channel Books with Brittany. I talk a lot about fantasy, sci-fi, horror books most of the time on the channel, and very excited to have a Malazan chat with these lovely ladies today.
Yes, and we are all first-time readers of the Malazan Book of the Fallen series. I guess we can go ahead and say how far along we are in the series. Right now, I just finished The Bone Hunters not too long ago. I'm going to be picking up Reaper's Gale, which is book 7, fairly soon, I'm hoping. Why don't you two talk about where you're at in the series so far?
So I am the newbiest of the newbies here because I am only at Midnight Tides. I just finished book 1 within Midnight Tides, and yesterday I started book 2 within Midnight Tides. And I love the Olin bug. That's all.
Yeah. It's great because Joanna, you're starting Reaper's Gale, which is one of my favorites. And Ola, you're on Midnight Tides, which is a little bit above Reaper's Gale, my favorite. So
Oh, wow.
I am almost 75% of the way through The Crippled God. So I'm nearly finished, which I don't know. I have lots of mixed feelings about it, but almost.
Oh, wow.
That's exciting. I can't wait to
Yeah.
hear your final thoughts. Goodness, wow.
Yes.
Probably the thing that is more intriguing to me about Malazan is that it's super thought-provoking, regardless of if you like it or not, or if you like that specific book or not. There's always so much to bring up around those books.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I know, Brittany, you were talking about how Reaper's Gale is one of your favorites and Midnight Tide's a close second. And I know for me personally, I've gotten to a point where I don't know that I can rank them anymore, because each book is making me look back at previous books differently. And when I look back at the experience of each book, it's like they all were so unique and different, and they all hit in such different ways. And it's fascinating to me to talk to people in the Malazan community, because so many people feel differently about different books. I feel like a large amount of Malazan Book of the Fallen fans have a very differing opinion to Brittany and me, which is that they tend to think that House of Chains is maybe a least favorite. I've heard a lot of people say that anyway, whereas we love that book. And I know that Ola, you liked that book too, but your memories
I
of
would say that my top right now is Memories of Ice, followed immediately after by House of Chains.
yeah. But it's
So
just so
that would be
fascinating to see how differing, how they hit in different ways for different people, and probably different times in your life and things like that.
Well, in addition to that, what you're saying about the book has a different meaning after you continue on. So like, might be too in depth right now, but like Dead House Gates, I didn't love it when I read it. And then as I continued the story and I got through House of Chains, I was like, I actually like this way more than some of the other books. Like my ranking changed, similar to now that I'm reading The Crippled God, I appreciate The Bone Hunters more, as well as Dust of Dreams I appreciate more now that I'm on The Crippled God, which I mean makes sense, but I've never read a series that your opinion of the previous books actually changes based on, as the threads tie together, I suppose.
Yeah. I had the same exact experience with Dead House Gates. If it was not for me wanting to go on with the series, I would have DNF'd it. Then I got to House of Chains. We know what happens. And I was like, wow. Now I get it.
Yeah,
yes.
exactly.
Yes. Also, we're going to be talking about the female perspective specifically because we find that in the Malazan Book of the Fallen community, we see a lot of male perspectives. We do see some channels that there are definitely some female MalazTubers, and I'm going to go ahead and link a number of female Malazan Book of the Fallen reviewers down below, so you get some more female perspectives. But in general, we were noticing there is a trend for this to be a more male-dominated type of fantasy series. I think we find that in general in adult fantasy, whereas young adult fantasy seems to be a little more dominated with female fantasy readers. But we wanted to offer a female perspective because this is a series. The Malazan Book of the Fallen, as well as all the other Malazan books, were conceived by two males, Ian Esselmont and Stephen Erikson. And we know that this particular series is also noted for being very gender neutral in a sense. So we could talk about that later. But we wanted to also discuss this series because there are some interesting and complex female characters in it. And we thought it might be useful, but we also want to just make sure that we're offering the disclaimer that we are not speaking for all female readers. Even the three of us have very individual, unique tastes when it comes to books. And we are just offering our own individual perspectives, understanding that this is unique, considering the fact that the series was written quite a while ago now, too. So the context of when it was written would probably have a different impact on modern day fantasy readers. And again, that we don't represent every female reader who is reading this particular series.
Very well.
Yeah.
Okay.
I wanted to add that also these other great women that are doing Malazan related videos, they tend to be veterans in the Malazan Book of the Fallen world, and they have done some great collabs that I personally have not been able to watch yet. But we are going to talk mostly spoiler-free, at least for the biggest chunk of this collab, because that's something else that we wanted to offer. So even if there have been female Malazan collabs, I guess that we are going to do something that is also spoiler-free if you want to approach this series for the first time.
Excellent. Yes. All right. And then from here, I guess maybe a good starting point would be to say, I mean, we've already kind of touched on this a little bit, but what are some things that you're loving about the Malazan Book of the Fallen series so far that maybe you haven't seen in other fantasy series, or just anything you want to note in general about it?
That's such a loaded question.
I
I really feel like, as I am nearly finished with the 10th book now, I think I've come to realize that what I like best about the series might differ from the majority of readers, because I find that sometimes if I'm either frustrated or there's a part I'm not loving, it tends to be something that other people love, and then I'm over here obsessing about other aspects of the book. So I would say, for me specifically, Stephen Erikson's writing style, the prose is just unlike any other fantasy series that I've really read. So that is what got me to continue reading it. And when I've had some people who maybe aren't even really interested, and I've read them a passage, or they've seen my Instagram story or vlog where I'm reading something and they're like, that's like poetry. And I'm like, yes, there's poems in this. There's verse as well as prose. And so I think his writing is just something that is so unique, and I don't know, it's beautiful. And to see this dark world where horrific things can be happening, but the way that it's told to you is something that really stands out as being very special to me. And I think, I guess one of the other things that made me want to continue on when I started is like the social commentary, the relatability, how this takes a look at human nature, human interactions, almost, what's the word I'm looking for? It doesn't exactly depict real historical events, but it takes a look at them and does something similar to that almost. And so I really like those discussions that are sometimes just had in the small talk between characters from time to time. So I think those are the two things that mainly gripped me from the beginning, other than there's obviously this huge intrigue and mystery, because we're just given tiny little bits of this magic and these gods and warrens and everything that we're just dying to find more out about. So his leaving a lot of things left to mystery really hooks me into keep going.
Yes, absolutely. Ola, do you want to add to that?
Oh yeah, I have a lot of things. So first of all, for me, I do agree with what Brittany said about the emotionality of it all and the darkness. Basically, what I got from that is that the dark things that are portrayed are not just as a shock value thing, and mostly they are used to promote an emotional reaction that would be used then to promote empathy and compassion. That is very different from the, oh, blood, pain, darkness. I think it's very different, and it's really felt, I mean, I really feel it when I read those books, that truly that was not the intent, because there are little commentary while you read that show you that was not just, let's make this character be ugly and bad and terrible. There's a commentary, as Brittany was saying. But also, on another note, there's an incredible amount of creativity. The things that this man created in this world, they are wonderful. And when people say, I want fantasy that really goes limitless, I think that this world building has a lot of incredibly creative creature and magic system, and also characters that are very diverse, that are not as common maybe sometimes. And people complain that the main characters are all white and cisgender and straight. Well, there's a lot here. There's so much here for everyone. So I guess those are two things that I would like to add.
Oh, those are perfect. Absolutely. Excellent. I agree completely. Actually, I think that those mysterious elements that you were talking about, that was what immediately captivated me about the series. When I read Gardens of the Moon, there was just something so unique about the tone and the magic and the mystery of it all. And it seems like that's something that maybe the three of us have in common, is that we like that sort of like mystique or that intrigue aspect. And I feel like this type of series, I feel like there are kind of almost two, maybe this is oversimplifying it, but I almost feel like there are almost two different kinds of readers when it comes to reading fantasy or books in general. One is somebody who wants a lot of exposition or a lot of explanation. They want to know things as you go along. They want the magic system laid out, everything. And then there are other types of readers who don't mind sort of just being dropped into the world and having this sort of not having all the answers yet. And that is basically the type of book I would say that or the type of series that this is, where you're pretty much immersed into the story right away. But I didn't see that as a negative. I feel like a lot of people talk about that aspect as though it's a negative, or that it's something to be intimidated by. But for me, and maybe because I hadn't heard as much about the series before I started it, it wasn't a negative. It was exciting for me.
I completely agree with that. And I think that I tend to sort of stay away from those types of books that have magic systems that are almost like a science, or like everything is explained. There is a formulaic way that you can use magic. They tend to not be my favorites. So that's why I love this, because I'm like, it's almost like limitless, not in a bad sense, like, that there's not consequences or that you can just go do whatever, but you can use your imagination so much more. I like things that have like open endings, or let you kind of think about some things for yourself before it's spelled out to you. So I feel like this series does a really good job doing that.
Yeah. And just to kind of go off that point and bridge it to the idea that you were also saying, that you two were also saying about the emotional aspects of the relationships and moments between characters. And I completely agree with what Ola said about how there is such a diverse cast of characters, and you get an enormous cast of characters, unlike what we're used to in other fantasy novels, where we're just following our main little group of characters, or one POV or two POVs. We have a massive cast. and we don't necessarily stick to one for very long, and we might skip, it might be a few books before we get back to certain characters, that kind of thing. But I think that one thing that's I would say about the emotions that are sort of evoked through this series, there are definitely moments for me personally, and I'd love to hear what you two think, if you agree or disagree. I feel like there are moments where you are confronted in a very penetrating way with some of the difficulties and hardships or trauma that certain characters endure. It's very much in you're very confronted with it. I'll just put it that way. But then at the same time as there is that aspect of it, I would say we all know, this has been said before, this isn't a spoiler, but a huge part of this series is the theme of compassion and the theme of empathy. So like Ola was saying, he doesn't, Stephen Erikson and Ian Esselmont probably too, do not add in aspects of darkness for the sake of darkness, that there's always a purpose behind it. But I would also add that the idea of empathy, in my opinion, is one that it does require active reading, in the sense that you're not told how to feel. You are confronted with things, but you're not told to feel bad or told to feel upset or told to feel even any sort of concern for certain characters. But I do think that you will get the most out of this particular series if you take the time to explore the different aspects of what this character has been through before, what they're going through now. Because some series, you'll have the author who will just tell you over and over again, this character is depressed, this character is depressed, this character has PTSD, and you don't get any of that. You kind of do have to have some agency on your part to unveil that aspect of empathy, in my opinion. I would like to hear what you two think. Do you agree or disagree?
Yeah, absolutely. This is what I have called before, not regarding to Malazan, but I call this show don't tell representation when it comes to PTSD and stuff like that, because you are showing what someone is going through. You're not telling me, hey, so they have PTSD, they are depressed, this one has anxiety. It's different, because the other way that I was trying to explain this before is when I was saying darkness is put in the book to promote empathy. It's not like I am telling you these bad things happens and you have to feel for that. I'm just telling you these bad things happen. And the way that I tell you that, I hope it provokes something in you. I hope it provokes a reaction, because that is, I feel, the end goal of what is told.
Excellent.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that something that plays such an important role in that is your personal life experiences, which I know I'll touch upon later, and how that can affect everybody. And as you said, Joanna, it is something that you have to actively do. I know the biggest example I have is when I was reading Midnight Tides, and I'm going to leave this spoiler free, but I was having a conversation with people about a certain choice a character had made after being through trauma, and the people weren't really understanding that I was conversing with why it would be okay for someone to make this certain decision. And it just that's just an example of how, if you're not taking the time to put yourself in the character's position, in their shoes, in what they've walked through, then you might still miss it, because like you said, Ola, he's not telling you need to feel this way. He's just saying this event has happened. So for somebody who's been through trauma and things similar, or just other terrible things, it might click with them quicker, because they are already familiar with those types of feelings that go along with it. Hopefully that kind of makes sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense. It explains why sometimes certain things that maybe are less understood about dealing with trauma and other hardships are not so well understood by some readers that maybe are not familiar with that. So the thing is that Erikson does not sugarcoat anything, in my opinion, and even the bad aspects and the bad behaviors that come from dealing with a lot of hardship and darkness and trauma, they are not sugar-coated. If you become a bitch after dealing with something because you are going through it and you need to kind of unleash it, and it's not okay. I'm not saying that's okay. You have to work on your own issues and all of that, but also we are all humans. I mean, we are all beings and we are not perfect. And that's what those characters go through as well. They are not perfect. They are not a sugar-coated version of trauma. They are a very realistic, in my opinion, expression of that can be very personal. I'm not saying that they represent the stereotype. They represent an expression, and that can resonate or not, that can be understood or not, but definitely is going to make you feel something, because some characters are very polarizing. You either love them or hate them because they make you feel, and that's the point.
Excellent point. Excellent point. And I love what you said about the characters are not like sugar coated, because I think a lot of times when we read fantasy, especially, I think we see people go through challenges and there's that like the hero's journey, basically. We want to see characters respond in the way we think we would respond, or the way we would want to respond in certain situations. And we don't always get that kind of story in this particular series.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also very healthy to show the bad and the good of everything. So sorry, Brittany, go ahead and now.
No, it's okay. I just was going to say also that I do think that sometimes that's where you get such a diverse reaction to particular characters, because my favorite characters tend to be those that have I know I've had conversations, especially with Ola, about this. They've been through trauma. They've had terrible things happen to them, and they don't make the right decisions, because who can go through some of these horrific events and smile and be the happiest of people all the time? Of course, there are people that are going to, but as somebody who's struggled with that, like, I want to see the raw, real reaction of somebody who's just like, I've been through the worst of it and I'm not even a nice person anymore. And like you said, it doesn't mean that that's what somebody should do or it's the right decision, but to have that type of representation that I know a lot of females can relate in one way or another. I'm thinking of a specific book I'm sure that you guys know at this point, but I think that's such important female representation in this series. And I think that I appreciate it even more because it was so well written by a man, to have that understanding and to put that perspective into the book for readers to relate to, I guess.
Yeah, and that leads to another discussion point, which is about the female characters, of what we think of the female characters so far in this series. And there are quite a few, but there is one in particular that we're kind of hinting at, that is introduced in book 2. And we're not going to give names or anything because we're keeping this totally spoiler free. But that is a perfect example of, I think, what we're talking about here, because there is a particular character who goes through a lot of different things, and it can be very easy to just have an emotional reaction to one part of that character's story and make a sort of decision about that character. But as a reader, as an active reader, it is important to take into account multiple aspects of what this character has been through before. So I guess that's where I'm getting at. Whereas you don't automatically become an empathetic reader. I think it does require a certain amount of agency to get that experience from reading the series. My experience, yeah.
But also, it is very honest and correct to dislike heavily a character for some very unlikable traits and choices and all of that. The thing that I would comment on is having a decision that is unchangeable about them. Well, while you can dislike them and do like not having a great time while reading about them because you dislike that specific area of this character, you should be flexible to adapt to whatever the story tells you more about these specific characters or other characters in general. And I think that there's where empathy comes in, realizing that sometimes a very unlikable and annoying trait has a meaning. Again, not justifying that, but explaining it. And that's different.
You explained that so well. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I think, too, that one thing that I noticed pretty early on, I would say at least book 2 going forward, and I mentioned it to Steve when we had the interview, is that he was able to write these characters so that my feelings changed about the particular character as more of the story unfolded. And I think that's so important and like smart when you think back upon it, because I feel like a lot of characters that we tend to read in fantasy, it's not even that they're one dimensional, but even if you have morally gray characters, I can think of some very well known morally gray characters that most of the time, even if they do something bad, you're like, I love them. You know what I mean? But I feel like the characters in this book series are so much more realistic, because if you think about the people in your life, do you ever just have the same feelings about them all the time? Because, I mean, how is that possible with life circumstances, with moods, with events taking place, especially the harsh conditions that these characters are living in and going through? It's like, it makes so much sense. And I think it was so well done that specifically the one character in book 2, and then 2 of the female characters, mother-daughter relationship in book 3, I was like back and forth so frequently throughout my reading experience of my emotions towards them. And I think that's just a natural human thing that was represented very well in a smart way that was not obvious. Like, it wasn't like he was trying to take you up and down, just naturally flowed that way. I don't know if you guys can relate to that at all.
Yes, I love what you had to say about that. And I think that's something I recently heard Stephen Erikson. I recently listened to Stephen Erikson speaking about his series recently. And one of the things that he said that I thought was so fascinating was about how important it is to have characters that have conflicting motivations. And that's realistic. And it's interesting too, because I often hear people on BookTube, and not to say they're wrong, or I completely get where they're coming from on this point, but the idea of, like, as a reader, the desire to understand a character's motivation. And I think sometimes that can be a little bit challenging with certain characters because they do have conflicting motivations. But like you said, you don't feel the same way towards somebody all the time. Like, there are going to be conflicting motivations. That is realistic to us as humans.
Especially when you are going through an hard choice to make or an hard situation. I found myself flip-flopping between these or that many times. And another thing that I wanted to add upon the same topic is that it's so easy to relate to a character that you like, or at least you like to hate. But it's so much harder to actually relate to a character that you know is doing the wrong thing, that is annoying, that is unlikable. And I'm going to tell you that straight like that. I related to this character that gets extremely unlikable and does extremely not great choices a lot. And I'm not ashamed of that. I have been there. I know that. I hated that. And I hated when this character was going through that. Like, I was feeling, if I read faster for this part, they are going to get through this faster. So it was very intense. And I appreciated that.
I was just going to say, I think too, I will 100% admit throughout this series, I've been like, I need to know their motivation, especially with certain gods or things. And I think he does it on purpose. He wants you to think about it, not because he's trying to be tricky, but everything, if it's just obvious, if it's spelled out, I mean, it's so much less impactful, and then it's just straightforward, and it's the same for every reader. Whereas when he left some motivations up to the unknown, I suppose you'd say, then everybody can interpret it in a different way or find meaning in it. And I think that just is, I don't know, like, I keep saying it's smart and it makes sense because that's just so much of how I feel about the way he made a lot of these choices that are very different from a lot of other fantasy series, even complex, intense, dense fantasy series. This just completely stands apart from.
Oh, yeah.
I don't remember who said something like this, but someone said that, and maybe it was one of you. I don't even know if it was a video or just a chat that we had personally, but someone said that getting to know Malazan characters is like getting to know someone in real life. They are not telling you, this is my motivation, this is what I want to do, this is that. I'm just meeting them, and whatever happens, happens, and I have to deal with that. And maybe if I give them time, I'm going to get to know them and really understand them and appreciate them, or decide that I really hate them, stop. But it's like that in real life. You don't go up to someone and say, "Hi, my name is Ola. What's your motivation?"
Yes.
From there, we can even talk about various themes that we see with women, because we do see a lot of themes with women and characters in this particular series. For example, motherhood, sisterhood, and anything else anybody wants to add?
Power with women, and how some women deem power something or something else, and how different women deal differently with power. That's something that is also treated even from the very beginning with this female character in a leadership position. We see that compared to the Empress. And then we see someone else going through another leadership position and dealing with that in their own way. And yeah, there's a lot to say about that, but we can't.
Yes.
I think that, kind of relating back to one of your first questions, Joanna, is what did we enjoy most about the series? And for me, one of the things I loved the most are these relationship themes. So that's probably why some of the earlier books are my favorite, some of the continuations of certain novels. So we especially focus on, for several of the books, the relationship between sisters. And obviously there's other, like brother and sister and all kinds of other familial relationships, but the sisterhood in these books, I mean, it's enough to like rip your heart out at times. But it's like you said, I think it's really important to know that none of the characters, like you can't even say tropes within this book. Like there's not anything that's relied upon trope, because they're just so layered. I like that better than the word complex that you were saying, Ola, because then with one of the other installments, we have this mother-daughter relationship that has so many layers to it as well. And those were just some of my favorite things discussed in this series. And I remember just being, when I first sat and thought about this, those two relationships specifically, being so impressed that they were written by a man. And I don't mean that in a way that men can't write good female characters or good female relationships. Of course they can. This is proof of it. But the fact that, never having specifically experienced a mother-daughter or a sister-to-sister relationship, and motherhood, actually, it beyond just the third book that I'm thinking of, I mean, it's really discussed many times in sequels, even if it's just for small times here and there of certain characters' thoughts, that I found to be very relatable and realistic as someone who's not a mother and doesn't plan to be a mother. So I don't know, I just still to this day I'm so happily impressed that we got some of that representation and relatability in this series.
I feel the same way. Like there are times when I'm reading about certain female characters and some of the hardships that they're going through, or some of the thoughts they're going through, especially regarding motherhood, that have been so, it's just impressed me that this was written by a male. And same reason. It's not that I think you said it better than I do, than I'm about to. But it's just basically anybody who's not an own voices, writing from a different perspective. I've always found it impressive whenever a male writer or even a male songwriter can write from a feminine or female perspective and do so in a way that hits hard, for somebody who is in that perspective. So I think it's done so well. And I totally agree with the word layered. That is a perfect word for this. And there's just so much to explore there with how those are handled, how those themes are handled.
Yes, and some of these themes can be found more than once, as Brittany was saying. Maybe you have a bigger chunk of that theme in a specific part of the story, but then some of these can be repeated in different ways, and it shows different aspects of many themes. And so also it gets, in a way, not so attached to the concept of not being on voices. To me, it really feels like an exploration after observation of some specific aspects of life in general, because there are so many, besides motherhood and sisterhood and brotherhood, there are so many themes that are just part of life and touched upon in so many different ways, more or less focused on. But you can really see the diversity also in the way that themes are approached.
I have a question. What do you two think about certain, I mean, there are romantic relationships in Malazan Book of the Fallen, maybe not a lot, and maybe not explored quite in depth as much as like motherhood, for example. But what have you two thought about that so far? You even see a little bit of that in book one. I'll just go ahead and say that.
Yeah. I did not believe the one in book one at all. I thought it was like, I can't fall for this. This is not something that I really, believe. But it was not bad, let's say. It was just something that I was not feeling. Then going on, we found a specific relationship that gets pretty funny and is heavily inspired by something in real life that I thought was way more successful, like complete upside down from what we saw in book one. And then there was another relationship that I already saw that, I mean, there were a lot of type of relationships, because here I'm thinking more strict, like straightforward relationship, but then there are even character dealing with one another in a way that can be considered romantic-ish, even if it's toxic sometimes, and it's not definitely romantic. And again, a lot of different kind of point of views and different representation of what a relationship can or cannot be.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, I was saying, so yeah, there's that. I don't have much more.
No, I 100% agree with that. And if I could summarize my thoughts, it would be exactly what you just said, Ola, because I wouldn't say romance is really a factor much in this book,
No.
but there are romantic relationships. And that's a good thing for me because I hate usually reading romantic relationships. So the way that he does it is good for me because it's just kind of in the background, or sometimes it's humorous, or sometimes I'm like, did he just say that to her? Or sometimes I am like crying because of something that happens because I won't say anything else. But so I would agree, it's just all over the place, which is a perfect realistic representation of the way that it's meant to be. I mean, it's so far from anything else I can think of in what I'm reading that just you're meant to feel this way about a person's relationship. Like, it's none of that. Sometimes I want to know more because we're only told about past relationships between certain characters and you want to see more of how that happened, or like it's just sometimes little bits and pieces, and that's great because like we're doing a lot of epic things right now, and if we were all just focusing on, well, she's so pretty, then I hate that kind of stuff. Like, I hate that in my books. But it's realistic, as in still, okay, we're at a camp moving along, traveling, and we have human beings, so there are going to be types of relationships, so it's not like left out either, which is that's good.
Yeah, although it's not heavy with the romance by any means. I personally haven't found myself cringing, and I cringe a lot. It's kind of funny because I feel like I want to be a romantic reader. I feel like I'm a romantic at heart, but then when I read romance in books, I usually just cringe. But I haven't cringed at all at any of the romantic relationships. Now, this world doesn't lend itself to romance, I would say. But I also want to add, though, in relation to that, I love the character interactions in this series. Now, you can come into Malazan Book of the Fallen and you can love it for the sieges, for the military aspects, for the incredible world building. And I love all those things. But I also just love the intimate character interactions. And I also love even just the interactions between male and female characters that are not romantic. I live for that. So I love that about this series, that we actually get platonic relationships that are meaningful between men and women.
Yeah, but also we get platonic relationships that even sometimes feel more meaningful than actual romances, between like even male and male characters and all that. There's so much built in within the characters and between the characters. Some romances, I guess that's what we would call them, they are so healthy, and sometimes it's so good for me to look at them also, because I don't like the toxic masculinity there's in fantasy sometimes. And I mean, there are some characters that are straightforward ugly, but there are some characters that can get very sweet, and I think that's also a great representation when you put everything together.
I wonder if we want to go ahead and talk about trigger warnings, because there is a lot of heavy, difficult graphic content in Malazan Book of the Fallen. There is a lot of violence against women in this particular series. And so I want to go ahead and open up the discussion about that.
Okay, well, first of all, we know that Malazan is known as a military fantasy, even if I would say that there's not the only focus, and I think that is much more than just military fantasy. In fact, I don't like military fantasy, and I am really enjoying the series, so there's that. So any war-themed kind of trigger warning, content warning, you can expect, and very graphically so, and yeah. There's a thing, but that's not what we were talking about. But I wanted to put that out of the way since it's known as military fantasy, and I thought that we should address that also. Okay, so with the violence against women, it gets intense. As I was referring to before, there are some lines, even when things happen, that to me showed me a different kind of attention when it comes to that. And I'm going to repeat myself, not just for shock value, not just to make you feel bad for someone, but to make you understand layers about some issues and what some trauma can cause into someone. And I can appreciate that. I must say that it's not easy to read sometimes. And I have cried my eyes out multiple times during these books, but it was cathartic in a way. I think we can say that rape happens and sexual assault happens in different ways and levels of gravity. And so you should be prepared to that.
Yeah. In addition to that, like straight torture at times. So I think I just also want to say, as a very sensitive, as long as it's okay if I say this, as a very sensitive reader, female reader, to the way that women are treated in fantasy books, I really struggle to read a lot of backlist fantasy books because of the way that women are treated and spoken to and degraded, and expectations or the use of sexual assault or rape in certain series. So I guess just know that going forward with what I want to say, that I am ultra sensitive to those things, because as a woman with a past of trauma, being mistreated very poorly by multiple men in my life, I'm extra sensitive to it. And I know that that's something that people don't like to understand or feel like it doesn't matter, and you should just have to accept it and be okay with it. So that's kind of what I would like to say as a female Malazan reader, with the history that I have had, that there is a lot that's very hard for me to read. Not just those larger, more significant scenes, but sometimes in the smaller way, that whether it's sexual humor that really bothers me sometimes. And I would also like to say that I have the most respect for Steven Erikson as a human being and author, and I don't think that his views are whatsoever like reflected upon the treatment of women in this book. You know, I greatly respect him and the series, and I enjoy all of it as a whole, and I'm glad that I'm reading it and I don't have any regrets. But I know that some women want to know that going forward. So I like to say that just in case, because I have had questions from other female readers saying, is it going to be like this the whole time after the second book? Because it was hard for them to get through that. So I just want to be open and honest that my personal reading experience has been hard, even in the things that are meant as jokes. It disgusts me sometimes. And then I didn't have any issues with any of the way that trauma was handled until Dust of Dreams. So we won't get into that in this video, but I do have some questionable things. And I think once we all get to a certain point, I think we could discuss that more. But it wasn't until that book that my opinion started to change a little bit, just on that one circumstance. But I just wanted to throw that in there. That's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very important to be willing to talk about these things. I haven't been triggered so much in this series, but I think it could be very, very triggering for people, whether they've been through things or not. And even if I think that trigger warnings are important personally. And I think they're important because not only could somebody be coming from a past of trauma and find some of the content in these books very triggering, but also, I mean, life is weird, life happens, and sometimes we're going through more sensitive periods than others. And it wouldn't be right to read a Malazan Book of the Fallen book during a very sensitive time. That happened to me recently with a Joe Abercrombie book. I almost had to temporarily DNF it because I was going through some physical injuries, and reading about violent scenes was really kind of shaking up my nervous system. So I feel like you have to feel into your own personal boundaries and feel what's right for you. And it is quite possible that this series might not be for you if it's something you're very sensitive to. And so I want to make that okay. And I just want to put that statement out there. I know for me personally, although I haven't personally found this series triggering in that way, I have been very emotional through some of the violent scenes that have happened towards women, and processing some of what's happened to certain characters has been very, very emotional. And I know that when I finished, for example, books 3 and 4, for whatever reason, those particular books left me kind of in a almost emotionally shaken state for months. I felt kind of weird after processing and reading and thinking through things. And sometimes they won't hit you. At least for me, I'm the type of person where sometimes traumatic things, I'll read them and they won't quite hit me while I'm reading them, but then I'll think about them and then they'll start to hit me and kind of go deeper into my system. So I just want to leave room for all different types of experiences. And I know that, like, it's interesting just talking about the female perspective. I just recently finished book 6, and of course this is spoiler free, but there was one particular scene in that book that disturbed me. And I did mention it in my review, and I tried to kind of bring it into some thematic context. But I did question, and I talked about this with Brittany, that I did question whether that particular scene doesn't get talked about very much, which is understandable because it is one kind of small, like, couple of pages in the scope of a very massive book where a lot is happening. But I also wondered if maybe it doesn't get talked a lot about because it was a female character. And if it were a male character, if that would have been received differently. But that's all I have to say about that.
I would like to add something regarding trigger warnings and all of that. I want to back up very heavily what Joanna just said, that sometimes a book is not that is bad or anything, it's just not your time to read it. And it's very important to know yourself and to know what you can or you cannot handle in that specific moment in time, because it can change, it can vary. I've been very open about me and my past. So very quickly, I have CPTSD and anxiety, and I have been through rape more than once. So there's that. I have been through therapy a lot. And for me, having faced my traumas a lot through therapy with someone that is their job to make you go through that is different reading about something that is very potentially triggering than maybe someone that is not yet so far on their path. So this is what I'm trying to say there. Do not be harsh on yourself if you don't feel like you can't handle it now. Maybe one day in the future you will, maybe not, maybe you will not want to, maybe you will want to try. It's absolutely good. And I really do not want people to feel like they have to be able to endure something, even if it's just a word on a page. On the other hand, I found that personally for myself, sometimes when I already done my work with therapy and all of that, it is cathartic to read about some things. It is very harsh. And I am going through these books very slowly because not only the sexual assault part, but everything that happens for me is very heavy to take in. And I've always been a huge empath. So I guess that's a lot at play into that. And I know that both of you consider yourself empath as well. And I can back it up. I mean, these two lovely ladies are friends. They are truly wonderful people and very empathetic one at that. But that can be also a part. So consider how much you can deal with that. And if you can deal with that, like me in a moment like a pandemic, that's not fun. But maybe you have to pace yourself differently than you would normally with another kind of book. And I may take a month and a half to read just one of these books. They are chunky, yes, but not as chunky to take a month and a half. And I have done that because that's what the time that I needed. And that's okay.
Yeah.
I think the one thing I want to add too is I think that when we all kind of talked about doing this video, we just wanted female voices to be heard and represented. And like Ola was saying, and Joanna was saying, that it's okay no matter where you fall. And I just feel like I want to help be a voice for other people who might feel similar to me, to know that it's okay. Because as we stated, we are all three different females who have similarities and differences, and we have similar feelings about the books and different feelings about the books. So everybody has a unique reading experience. And my particular one is that, like, I have gone to therapy and worked through my traumas as well. And it's just resulted in me having a zero tolerance policy for like any mistreatment. I'm immediately like, get out, disgusted. So that's just my jaded self. And so it's okay if you love Malazan Book of the Fallen. It's okay if you love this world and this characters and Stephen Erikson's writing, and you're still bothered by certain things like that. I want people to know, because I go through times I've messaged both of you and I'm like, I feel wrong for saying this because no one says this. No one says they love these books, and they're extremely bothered by some things at the same time. More than, I mean, everybody is bothered by the horrible events because they're terrible, but I don't think in the way that I mean bothered, like to the point where I hate reading those certain parts. So just know it's okay if you feel that way too, and you can still love Malazan and Stephen Erikson and feel that way, and you're still a Malazan fan, and you are still. I'm like speaking out my feelings and to you guys. I just want people to feel valid about their opinions, because it's not a fun feeling to read those things that make you feel awful and then feel like you're isolated and alone in your thoughts, and then feel like, can I even call myself a fan because I had this particular issue? And I just want everybody to feel like it's okay no matter what you feel.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to back up. You're valid, whatever you feel. And also, I'm going to expose myself here. When we talked in the beginning about this character that is introduced in book 2, and a lot of things happen to this character, I was going through that. Okay, I said I was like reading fast because I wanted to hand for the character as much as I wanted to end it for me. And then something minor that compared to what happened before happens. It's something minor that gets this character an annoyance that is, to me, pretty disgusting, but it's not something that heavy. But that last drop, that annoyed me, that frustrated me, that I was honestly put off by, because I was like, do we really need this? Sounds like overkill to me. And see, you can feel about that, even about a minor event that is not even that traumatic when you take it by itself, because the reaction that I had to that minor additional event was overkill. Why did you do that to this character? You did enough to them already. So it is okay. Still, I'm going on with the series. Still, I got very attached to that character, and I really appreciated that character for so many reasons. It is okay to love and hate things about the same things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That was so well said. And I completely agree with what both of you said. You are still valid with whatever is coming up for you. And if you need to temporarily put the book down, that's completely fine. And I completely back up what Brittany said too. It doesn't make you any less of a fan if that's the case for you. And don't ever let anybody dictate how you should read the books or how you should feel about certain aspects of the books by any means. And that's so true too, Ola, that it can be something that is seemingly small to certain people that can be big to you.
Yeah.
I've definitely had that experience, even just with the positive things. There have been like certain moments where I'm like, I'm crying over this one character interaction that nobody probably cares about, but I just think is so beautiful or something. Yeah. We can all have unique responses in that way.
Yeah. And I also believe that in life, the little things are sometimes more impactful than the big things, both in a good and in a bad way. So just to sum it all up, I guess.
Yeah, and I think too, I'm hoping once you guys finish, you'll maybe want to do some spoiler discussions or even multiple points, because I do think one thing that will be very different, or not different, very interesting for us to discuss is that fine line of maybe when it is overkill or too much, because I'm specifically thinking of book 9, and kind of how that threshold will certainly be different from everyone. Some just essays Stephen Erikson has written, I suppose, in response to some of these things that are definitely valid concerns or things that other readers have noted as well, because there is a more in-depth conversation to be had, I think, more nuanced discussion of the fine lines of that threshold too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll just go ahead and share here that we are planning to do more videos on Malazan Book of the Fallen from the female perspective, and hopefully get into some spoilers too. But for this video, we just wanted to offer a non-spoiler or spoiler-free perspective in case anybody is interested in picking up the series and curious about what 3 unique female readers have to say. Yeah, with that said, is there anything else you two wanted to add to the discussion, or?
I would just like to thank both of you for having me. And also, I would like to thank both of you for being so very supportive with me during my journey reading these books. And I'm saying this because sometimes we were talking about how hard this can be. It's very good to have someone to talk to. So I guess that's another little trick that you might employ if you find that you're having a hard time and you would like to confront yourself with someone. I had the luck to have these 2 lovely friends here that talked with me, and even in the good moments, like, this was so good, I loved it, great. It was just a great experience that was enhanced by both Joanna and Brittany.
Yeah, I want to also say thank you to both of you so much, because you guys both know I've been there voxering. I don't know what to do right now. I'm freaking out because I don't know how to feel and I'm not okay. And I just really think that it's wonderful to have Malazan friends, not to mention just regular wonderful friends regardless of the books we're reading, and I do think that that has been very important, because when I started this I had no one to read it with. That's why I got into the podcast, because I said literally to them when I did the podcast with 10 Very Big Books, I was like, I feel like they're my Malazan friends because I have none. And it's just made all the difference being able to talk about some of these things, because I truly think that he wants you to talk about these things. That's why he's put so many thought-provoking themes and such in the books. So definitely great advice, Ola.
Yeah, and I think actually I got this from you, Brittany. I think that the series, it really does become richer through community and through talking to others. And I have you two to thank too, that I can boxer you two and share feelings and thoughts on Malazan Book of the Fallen. Yeah, I definitely feel like I have gotten so much more out of the series from the ability to do that rather than to do it alone. But yeah, it's nice that the 10 Very Big Books podcast is there too as a resource for those who are interested too. Shout out to them. Yay.
I guess going full circle, when I was talking about how thought-provoking this series is, I have heard many times from many different people, regardless of where you come from and how you feel about these books, that some people, most people, tend to appreciate them, even if it's not enjoy them, but appreciate them afterwards. Well, you think back on and you connect and you have a kind of backwards reaction to things. And it's interesting. It's very unique, definitely.
Absolutely agree with that. Yes. Well, thank you two so much. And thank you everyone for watching. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.